my view has always been, as a consumer of technology, that we've made so many things that used to be complicated and full of friction relatively frictionless. And it's our choice as a society to choose where we deploy that. And we have deployed reducing friction in e-commerce and advertising. I would love to see, even just like if we took 10% of what we've spent on optimizing advertising and spent that on like making it easier to decarbonize your home, I think we'd be golden.
Welcome to Climate Papa. This is a show about climate change, technology, and parenthood.
Well, welcome to episode 19 of Climate Papa, a show about the intersection of climate change, technology, and parenthood. And I'm your host, Ben Idelson. I'm based in Seattle, and I invest in climate startups with a fund called Step Change. And I'm a papa to 3 kids, a 6-year-old girl, a 3.5-year-old boy, and a 10-week-old boy. Today's episode was actually recorded the week before our new guy was born, so going in a bit of a time machine. Today, we talk about an issue I think central to our collective climate response. How do we take all the work we've done politically and actually execute on making the policies into a physical reality? It turns out that between passing legislation like the Inflation Reduction Act and a homeowner actually getting solar panels or a heat pump discounted and financed, there's a major coordination and paperwork and financing problem to solve. So I sat down with Jeff Coleman, the founder and CEO of Eli Technologies. Jeff has had a career that led him through a stint on the Obama campaign, working at numerous nonprofits, and eventually building out the Access Clean California program. He's now turning his full energy to help make home decarbonization more equitable and affordable at scale. He founded Eli to do exactly this. And Eli is exactly the type of company that Step Change is focused on. We're looking for places where software-based products can really unlock the deployment speed of climate solutions. We've been very lucky to be investors in Eli's seed round, and as always, nothing in this conversation is investment advice. With that, let me welcome Jeff on.
Hi, I'm Jeff Coleman. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Eli. I'm based in Sacramento, California, and I have 2 sons, age 4 and 7.
Your audio sounds good, so whatever you're doing, I
Good.
think seems to be working fine.
I busted out the big guns. I'm a secret life as a musician, and I have some recording stuff that has been sitting in my closet since my second kid was born.
What kind of music did you play?
I play now in a sort of bluegrassy rock band.
You still get to do some gigs?
Yes, I'm very, very fortunate that my family allows me to step away once in a while. Yeah.
Well, tell me about the dad part of being a climate dad first.
Yeah, sure thing. I've got 2 sons. One is turning 4 next week, and the other will be 7 in July. So 3 and 6, but feeling a little more like 4 and 7 right now.
What are they up to that makes them feel particularly like 4-year-olds and 7-year-olds?
Well, so the 2 of them together are greater than the sum of their parts. I know you have 2 as well. I'm sure you've experienced this. There's like this organism that they become when they combine forces. They're both like their mom and dad. I would say independent is like a nice way of saying it. Other words that have been thrown around are stubborn and
challenging.
They're challenging. They're really a ton of fun, but a lot of work. Work isn't even the right word. They take up a lot of space when they're around. So
it's the classic line of like, everyone wants to raise these self-motivated, independent, thoughtful, driven adults, and you want kids that just like at times just listen to you and put like their shoes on.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's that constant tension. Our daughter will just negotiate so sneakily. She has this like intuition for like when to push back and like how to do it, and I pull in like a thread from over here, and it's like, oh, like this is so frustrating, and you are going to be a force to reckon with, and I'm so proud of that at the same time.
Totally. My oldest is got that. He's got a bit of like a engineer's mind, which is absolutely totally foreign. It comes from my wife's side of the family, I think. But this like ability to find one thing in the thing I just asked him to do or said that is factually incorrect or isn't, he can pick apart any argument. It's it's sort of terrifying because he's only 6. And I'm like, oh my God,
This is gonna be tough.
what are the teenage years going to be like?
Yeah. Well, we're on the precipice of becoming a family of 5 here in the
Oh, buddy.
coming
Congratulations.
days to week. So thank you.
I did not know
I don't know if I
that.
shared that. Yeah.
Oh my
So
God.
I've drafted my, out of office autoresponder. I like have a few things ready to go, and then we're just like seeing when it happens.
That's exciting.
So this will be, it's I don't even know. It feels like just kind of the next level of chaos, or extending the chaos we're in. And I'm third of 7, so
Oh my gosh. Okay.
So I like grew up with a high baseline of like kids in chaos. So
Well, good for you.
Thank
Congrats.
you. This will very likely be this will certainly be the last Climate Papa recording before that extra papahood comes
it's an
in.
honor.
So thank you. Well, tell me a little bit about just your whole path. You kind of have like some political background, some tech background. Now you're like, this amazing climate founder, and we'll get into what Eli's doing, but I'm just always curious how you kind of thread this together.
Yeah. I mean, I think the thread that traces through all of my life is that I've never been very good at applying myself towards things that I don't care a lot about. And so that first kind of showed up in school, where I would do the first 6 problems of a 30 problem math set and be like, oh, this next 24 problems are just making you do the same thing. So I eventually, as an adult, learned that sometimes you need to do things that you don't want to do. But I think, I did learn early on that I was much happier, but also I performed better and was able to contribute a lot more when I really understood why I was doing something, and that I didn't have to make 5 leaps ahead of, well, I'm doing this so that then I can do that, and then this, and then that. I'm doing this so I can get good grades, so I can get into a good college, so I can, like, that never worked for me. And so at the end of high school, I decided not to go to college. I took my parents out to lunch and told them, I had just played, I'm a musician. I had just played a gig the night before and made like $100, which might as well have been $10,000 to me. And I was like, well, good news, guys. I'm fine. I'm a musician. I'm going to make my living this way. I don't need to go to college. I was already like enrolled and set to go to college. And so I played music professionally for about 7 years.
Wait,
and
you skipped the part where they reacted to that. What was their reaction?
Oh yeah. It was mostly shock, actually, at that moment. My family, my sister and my parents, they all went to Stanford. Actually, they went to the same college, and there was an expectation that that's what was going to happen, although not a lot of pressure. It was just sort of like, yeah, of course that's what's going to happen. So I think they handled it extremely well. Now that I'm a parent, I can say they were not pleased, and they did try to talk me out of it a bit, but really that it ended at the end of that one lunch. And from that day on, they supported me and were as supportive as they could be. I'm sure they had like lots of conversations with their friends and fretted a lot about what I was doing. This was during the sort of George W. Bush presidency and the Iraq War. And I kind of was, I wasn't like, I wouldn't say I was an activist, but I was a little plugged into what was going on in the world and not particularly thrilled about what was going on in the world. And kind of eventually got to this point where I was like, I don't fancy myself a protest songwriter, but I would like to do something. And so I went back to school and kind of started applying myself on the side, still playing music, but ended up doing an internship at a nonprofit called Earth Justice that is a really amazing, wonderful organization that uses the courts primarily as a tool to advance environmental justice and climate. I was really inspired by the folks I worked with there. I found a place where they loved that I was also a musician, and I had kind of always imagined that I would have to, wear a disguise and have these two separate lives, and found a place where I could kind of, be my whole self. A little bit cliche, but and yeah, I spent 5 great years there. Kind of a mix of things from fundraising to communications work. I ended up being kind of the youngest person in the room when someone was like, hey, what's this MySpace thing? Should we do something? Should we find out how to reach people there? Like, aren't young people on these things? So I kind of like stumbled into some early like social media organizing, fundraising stuff. And
You were a social media manager before there was like a phrase for
yeah,
that.
a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah. And yeah, that kind of led me to the Obama campaign in 2007. I attended, Barack Obama spoke in Oakland. It was like the second place that he did a public event after announcing his candidacy. So this was early March 2007. And I went to a rally. I went up to a table at the rally where some organizers were handing out T-shirts and said, like, how do I get involved? I want to help. And like, long story short, within 3 weeks, this really incredible organizer had convinced me to quit my job and, ultimately leave my life, my girlfriend, my apartment, everything, and just kind of went on the road with the Barack Obama's rock band for what ended up being almost 2 years. A big part of that journey for me was working with folks on the digital or technology side of things to build really just little micro tools here and there, things that could help us solve real problems on the campaign. And I fell in love with being that person who's not a technical person, but who's working with a product team, who's seeing problems become solutions in, a matter of, in that case, hours or days, because we were moving really fast. After the campaign ended, I was very much not cut out for White House life or DC life in general. And my boss on the campaign encouraged me to hit up some Obama donors and raise some money and take some of the stuff that we had done on the campaign with technology and kind of find a way to offer it to the broader sort of progressive political and civic landscape. So that's kind of how I ended up in tech, which was never my intention.
That campaign feels like it was I mean, I'm sure every campaign has some element of that, but there's something about, I think, that '08 campaign that brought together like such a demographic of kind of optimism and energy. And also I think it was this moment in social media of optimism around those platforms and the chance to actually apply these tools. I think it felt like the first that really like was native to some of that.
Yeah.
And I think obviously kind of being like a younger led campaign and, I mean, every campaign I think has elements of that now, but it almost feels like it's become professionalized in a way that there it was grassroots. And there's this alumni of that campaign that have like rippled through the ecosystem now, taking that energy and learning and kind of like an optimism forward on various paths.
Yeah, there's definitely an Obama mafia. I think it was a combination of, and I think a lot of people, depending on how old you were at that time, you may or may not like realize this, but at the time, he was the outsider candidate. He was, it seems inevitable when you look backwards,
Right.
but like
You become the incumbent.
Most experienced political professionals were working for Hillary Clinton or John Edwards even. We were all kind of like the outcast weirdos, and we knew that we were not going to win by any kind of conventional means. And we knew that we had a really amazing product in Barack Obama in terms of his ability to inspire people and in his public speaking and stuff like that. So there was no master plan and there was no genius behind it all. Maybe Barack Obama is a genius, but there wasn't some grand strategy. It really kind of unfolded over time and was like the natural evolution of things for that cohort of people. And I do think that it did become kind of professionalized after that. But one of the things that endured from it, I think a lot of the people I know from the campaign are not in politics anymore. They're, the head of public policy at Lyft, or like there's all kinds of intersection with the startup community. And I think both kind of like startup stuff definitely seeped into the Obama campaign and how we operated. But I do think, vice versa also happened where some of the things that we learned, a lot of companies that are looking at how to build kind of ground up support for a new way of doing something, a new way of buying groceries. Even I worked at a startup that was doing that. And I think we took a lot from that kind of movement building approach.
Well, there's also a thread. I mean, you said that you're not coming from the engineering world, but like you're coming from this like very urgent, outcome oriented, like build the plane immediately, urgently, because like we got to take it like deadline, and like there's something so kind of contained about the problem of an election of like, there is this date and you will get the feedback of the outcome. And, yes, there's like a bunch of inputs into that, but like the urgency of it is, like I can see how the kind of adrenaline rush and the necessity that it requires like invention and action does lend itself to startup operators, and lends itself to you, which I'm sure we'll tie into, like looking for cases when technology is not like technology for technology's sake, but like technology for the sake of actually driving some action, some behavior, some real world thing forward, which we need to do a lot of when we talk to, we'll get into around kind of climate actions. And so I think that's deeply relevant to, to many kind of real world problems.
Yeah. One of the things, I mean, I drew a lot from that experience that I use every day now. Some things I learned, I had to unlearn because the rest of the world isn't a zero-sum game where you win or lose on a certain date, right? So some of that, I think I was young enough at the time that I, subsequently had to be like, okay, no, this world doesn't actually work like that world in some ways. Or, having every single, not every, but, the vast majority of these like brilliant graduates coming from every college in the country desperately wanting to work for you.
For free.
For virtually
low.
nothing. So those things, although I do often say there's another founder in our space who I worked with on the Obama campaign, and we were just saying the other day, this is like this moment right now, the amount of talent that is, and even not just young people, but mid-career folks who want to dedicate themselves to being some part of the solution. It feels a lot like it did in 2007, 2008, where kind of this feeling of the best and brightest all coalescing around a common set of problems. And it's pretty cool. It's definitely like the easiest recruiting I've done since then.
Yeah, that's sure. And I think that's one of the major tailwinds that's gonna make a huge difference, right?
Yeah.
And
Sure.
gives me like the thing that gives me the most hope is meeting people that are talented that want to go and work on the space and find their way in it.
Yeah.
Because that's like, that's what will drive this forward.
Yeah.
So walk me through kind of how do you go from there to climate in particular as...
It's kind of always been my comfort zone. When I was at Earth Justice was this really kind of transitional time for what was then the environmental movement. Earth Justice has been around since the 70s. They were a part of the passage of kind of the landmark environmental laws that created, sort of 30 years of the backbone of how the environmental movement functioned. But it was also, while I was there, we won a case in the international court that was the first time that climate change was established as a human rights issue by like international law, right? And so there was this kind of transition of going from telling the story of the earth and preserving it to people and how climate was impacting communities and communities that weren't traditionally a part of like the environmental coalition. So we worked a lot with like salmon fishermen in the Northwest and these kind of different stakeholder groups. And that I think really inspired me. I think I always had a little trouble connecting with the kind of traditional green movement of just like saving land and beauty for the sake of beauty and the ecological aspects of it. It really kind of lit me up to start seeing this kind of human side of it and seeing things like these like gruff salmon fishermen working with these like old hippies in Seattle. So that's kind of always been there. I specifically came back to climate in 2015. I had just done a startup that was kind of climate based. It was food systems based work, and knew that I wanted to, I was having my first kid and I wanted to take a few years off of startup life. So I was thinking of going back into the nonprofit sector or maybe even government for a few years, just like actually get off work at 5. And I was introduced to this nonprofit, Grid Alternatives, that does, it's the largest nonprofit solar installer in the U.S. Also, just generally one of the leading organizations focused on sort of the implementation side of climate justice and environmental justice, where it's not just advocacy work, but they're rolling trucks out to communities and building solar arrays in low income and disadvantaged communities around the U.S. So I decided to join Grid because I was looking for something specifically on that like building side. It felt like around 2016 was kind of the beginning of something that has really blossomed now, which is climate as a solutions oriented practice as opposed to a problem focused space. And this is pure selfish, or at least self-awareness, that I personally am not very happy and don't have a lot of fun doing work that's all about pointing out problems.
Limiting. Like,
yeah,
let's
and just
add
I'm
a
just
limiter
not.
here. Let's stop. Yeah.
Yeah, I've worked like enough in like advocacy adjacent work to know that like I'm not a good advocate. I'm not the person to spend day after day like making the case for something to change and fighting City Hall as it were, and that I'm much better suited for something where we can get a team together and try to build something that's part of a solution. And I want to be clear, we really still need advocates, and more of them. Is still like it's not like we're post advocacy in the climate movement.
It's where you find your energy.
Yeah,
and where you find you do good work.
Yeah, it's what worked for me. So yeah, while at Grid, I saw that first of all, in our work, we were installing thousands of solar systems on low income households. The soft costs associated with that were like absurdly high. So we had such a hard time finding homeowners who were qualified for our programs, getting their trust, getting them to sign all the necessary paperwork, of which there's a lot. All of that process just felt so burdensome. We had a huge operation dedicated to it. And at one point, I was talking to a counterpart at a for-profit solar company, and we had determined, over the course of this conversation, that what we were spending to get a family signed up for free solar was the same as they were spending to get a customer to pay $30,000 for solar. And that just seemed so fundamentally wrong. And I kind of got
we have a free thing over here. It's going to be free energy, all this amazing functionality. And we just need you to.
It's going to save you money.
Yes.
Yeah. No strings attached. Grid's programs they're not these like leases or anything like that. It's just no strings attached, free solar. So that just seemed wrong. And given my background in tech and on the Obama campaign, I immediately turned to like, well, what could we do to make this like to reduce friction? Here's something that technology is actually good at. I think there's a lot of things that software is not good at, but reducing friction and like burdensome paperwork processes, stuff like that. I'm like, okay, this is something we can do. This is not flying cars. There's got to be a way. And so I started working on some projects just within Grid, using tools that were available to us to think through streamlining those processes. And along the way, saw an RFP come out from the state of California saying, hey, we've got all of these dozens, if not hundreds, of programs offering incentives for clean vehicles, charging, clean transportation in general. And the state had done a study that showed that one of the top 3 barriers for low and moderate income folks accessing these programs is simply how hard they are to apply for and figure out. And so they were asking someone to build a, quote, one-stop shop pilot program where there would be a technology platform and a statewide kind of coordinated outreach campaign that would allow people to go to a single place, find out what they qualify for, and apply through a common application. And mainly I was leading a pretty large department at a big nonprofit, and I was like, oh, wow, fun. I get to like build a little startup within my nonprofit here if we got this. So a colleague and I put together an application. It was very unconventional. Most of these like government procurement processes have a lot of like boxes you need to check. We kind of ignored a bunch of them and just tried to make a case that, hey, what you actually want to do here is more like a startup. You want to start with like questions, not answers. You want to get design researchers, go out into the community, talk to folks. And
you
luckily,
don't actually know what you want to build yet. You need the team to go figure it out and like find, product market fit, if it were.
Exactly.
What you're doing.
Exactly. Yeah. We kind of just copied a bunch of pages out of like the Lean Startup playbook and put them in there. We didn't literally plagiarize, I should say, but we got together. We got together an impressive team, folks who kind of committed to joining if we got the thing, and and then just a few pages really describing how we would approach it. And by some miracle, someone at the California Air Resources Board on the other end of that liked it and bought it. So we won that. We built this one-stop shop. We started in 2018. We went out in the community. We did a ton of focus groups, design workshops. We started working with all of the program administrators for these different incentive programs, doing design workshops with them. And we built what is now called Access Clean California. And it really inspired us to think bigger and think about, okay, this problem of low and moderate income communities, disadvantaged communities accessing all of these funds is going to be much bigger if and when we have more investment in these things. And we knew that kind of on the Democratic side of at the federal level, there were already kind of things sitting on people's desks going back as far as 2010, 2011 from the Obama administration for what a large federal investment in these types of incentive programs would look like. So we kind of had an inkling of an idea that if there was a Democratic president and at least enough of a Democratic Congress, that there was a chance we could get some big policy wins in the next few years. So that's when we started kind of thinking about what eventually became Eli.
Could you walk through it's like the life of a bill, but like the life of a dollar here in terms of
Sure.
how to understand, I think most people listening to this have heard of the Inflation Reduction Act, but if not, maybe we'll hit on that for a minute. But you're talking about programs that exist in 2018, 2019. So, this isn't the first time that we've tried to provide incentives. But what's typically the flow here? Is it, usually this is federal money that then is handed down to states, that's then distributed via who? Just understand the different entities that we're talking about between, whoever's kind of politically deciding to try and make this happen, the policy side, through to, someone getting solar on their roof, maybe going back to the origin story, or we can use a more modern example.
Yeah, so I think probably the biggest thing that most people don't know is that for the most part, government and government entities don't run programs like this. They just approve buckets of money for them. So the way I think of it is, a law is passed, or in some cases, these programs are funded by utilities through ratepayer dollars. There are, in California, the Public Utilities Commission will issue a decision saying, directing the utilities, and these are private companies, but they're highly regulated. So they'll direct the utilities to create some program with X number of dollars. So what'll happen is there's a source of the funds, which is a government or utility. Then they will kind of design the program to a point. More like they will create a set of rules. So it might be that the dollars need to generate a certain amount of greenhouse gas reductions. They need to be deployed in low income or disadvantaged community. That they'll create a set of guidelines, but then they will issue an RFP or some kind of procurement process to hire a third party to come in and actually design and run the program. And those can really vary a lot. There are some pretty large private companies that do this. There's some nonprofits that do it. Grid is a program administrator. Grid Alternatives is a nonprofit program administrator for some solar programs. Every time there's one of these programs that gets initiated, let's say it's $100 million program, part of what the funder will do is say, you can only use X% of this money to administer the program. And what has happened as a result of that is that you have many, many programs, thousands of them around the US, and each one was designed and launched at a certain point in time where they had X number of dollars to give out to the community or to fund these projects, and then a small percentage of that to spend actually running the program. And that amount was never enough for them to build great user-friendly experiences on their website, to invest in tools that make it easy for contractors to access the funds. There's no sort of broad digital infrastructure in place that supports these programs, not because anybody in the ecosystem is a bad actor, but because no one's been incentivized to do it.
That's right.
Yeah.
I mean, you think about what is your incentive alignment? It's to win the RFP, I guess, primarily.
Yep.
Because that then kind of, as an entity is continues to fund this entity's existence and is kind of success. And then presumably you need you need to deliver on the RFP to an extent,
Yep.
but there's probably wide ranges in like the speed of that execution, the quality of that execution, the like user experience. Like those things there's probably, correct me if
Yep.
I'm wrong, like a lot of leeway in how that goes. And so yeah, no one said, hey, let's build the engine that makes the delivery across all of these programs as efficient as possible, and as effective as possible.
Yeah, exactly. There's another angle to it, particularly, we focus a lot on the sort of equity side of these programs, and fortunately, the trend is towards more and more of these programs being designed to deliver the majority of the benefit, or at least a substantial amount of the benefit, to low-income and disadvantaged communities. And in those cases, often the incentive structure, and I feel like there's like incentive with a capital I, lowercase incentive. The small I incentive structure of these programs is such that they might, for example, set rules that 40% of the funds or 60% of the funds need to go to people below a certain income level. But then beyond that, the organization that has to run the program, they don't have their incentive is to check those boxes as efficiently as possible. And so this has had some real like equity outcomes in places like California that have had these programs for a long time, where you're not giving the organization enough money to do the hard work of reaching communities that are more difficult to access. So you might have like a program that has an income qualification, but then, a few years later, they'll do a study and realize that, okay, we just did $100 million worth of vehicle incentives. It looks like a very large percentage of those dollars went to like recent college graduates who were living on their parents' couch and technically had a low income, but we're actually not the community that we were trying to benefit with these funds. And so then they'll tweak the policies to try and address that over time. And I think we're at a place now where the design of these policies is much, much better. But it is, this all exists within our, capitalist economy, where everybody is always incentivized to figure out the efficient way to do things. And these organizations often are trying to do more with less. So yeah, it hasn't been an environment that has been sort of it's funding a lot of innovation and kind of broader investment that could lift all boats. It's sort of each program, every program for itself, figuring out how to get it done.
It's a very decentralized way that we tend to do things in this country.
Yeah.
I guess to that point, like, are most of these programs, do you think of them as kind of the center point of on the political entity side? Is it mostly states, counties, cities, federal? Like, how do you think about kind of who's usually the RFP, generator?
Yeah.
For the majority of kind of, dollars and kind of transactions for these programs?
So it's mainly utilities and states. I mean, those are the biggest pieces. Utilities have had these programs for a lot longer. Then there are states like California, New York, Massachusetts, and others that have had state level programs for a while now. And there are a lot of things like at the municipal level, and there's community choice aggregators that run their own programs, which are a kind of subset of utilities. So there's all kinds of stuff out there. Even the federal funding, like in the Inflation Reduction Act, is flowing through states. So the states apply to receive the funding and stand up the program, but the state is the one issuing the RFP. And the states actually we're seeing a few states where the approach they're taking is to take that money and divide it up into regions and have RFPs for different regions. So it can
more decentralization.
Yeah, I would say it's quite a mess. Which I don't mean in a bad way. It's just it's a lot.
Well, and I think that decentralization can be good, right? Because it can tune things to local needs, and it can tune things potentially to like where the local need might be the local contractor base, the local homeowner base. But then it's challenging when you think about that kind of overhead of administration. When you see those markets, like it actually needs then more tools that create those shared efficiencies. Because hey, turns out every local program now needs to do income verification in a way. Like, do we all need to reinvent the wheel here in terms of perhaps just paperwork, but also like, okay, what are the automated ways to do this? Maybe that's a softball tee up.
A little bit.
Enter Eli.
It's a softball. Enter Eli, but also, I mean, I think it also speaks to a project that Eli helped start called the Node Collective, which is an open data initiative, where, the answer, as much as a startup founder, I'd love to say that the answer is everything just needs to run on Eli's platform. I don't actually think that is the answer. And certainly at this phase, even I'm not bold enough to say that the entire country and the, $1 trillion of funding of the IRA should all run off of a platform built by a 14-person startup. This whole space is evolving as we go, and we think we're going to be a big part of a sort of better, more user-friendly future for this space. But I think a lot of what's needed are kind of unsexy things like data standards and interoperability. I think, the reality is this huge fragmented landscape of programs, and we aren't going to get every single one of them to all adopt one way of doing things. But maybe we can get them all to structure their basic eligibility data in the same way so that innovators can come in and experiment with different ways of improving the experience for different stakeholders. So there might be things that someone wants to focus on how manufacturers can more easily plug into this landscape, and ways of qualifying their equipment for incentives in a more automated way. And all of these things kind of come back to, if everybody just does everything completely bespoke and builds all these little walled gardens of their own little CRM and all this stuff, it eventually, we can't do any of this stuff. And so we started an open data project with the Building Decarbonization Coalition, Rewiring America, NC Clean Energy in North Carolina, and RMI, formerly known as Rocky Mountain Institute, where we've all shared a lot of our data around these incentive programs with each other first, and then we're making it all publicly available for free at LF Energy, at the Linux Foundation. And we are using that as a kind of way to encourage all of these programs around the country to publish their data to a common place, so that we can have an ongoing source of like validated, normalized data around incentive programs.
That's great. And I think speaks to, for a lot of these challenges, I think it's really important to think about like what makes sense for a startup to do and own and slice and piece of the puzzle, the horizontal, vertical, like where you should play. And then what makes sense for government, and what makes sense for kind of nonprofit or kind of nonprofit-like entities. Because if you overly just say all we need is a hammer, like sometimes you need the screwdriver and sometimes you need the ruler. And I think that we have there's a maturity to saying like, no, this actually is going to move us faster if this goes out here. It reminds me of Solar App, which has radically, I think, changed residential solar permitting just in a few years. By streamlining that process, and could not be a startup. Like it by design, I think, was about standardizing the city's processes. It doesn't really make sense as a startup entity, but requires, a bunch of technologists to roll up their sleeves and build the thing. And so I guess let's zoom back 1 minute and like tell me what Eli is and what you're trying, what are kind of in the bounds of, I guess, that as a startup, and then, and how that connects to Node Collective and kind of the whole problem space, both now and what you might see over the next, couple of years.
Yeah. So, our mission is to eliminate affordability as a barrier to decarbonization for low and moderate income homeowners in the US. So we're very focused on single family homes at the moment, and in particular folks in disadvantaged communities or communities that have historically been impacted most by energy and climate issues. And we do that by building software and digital infrastructure to streamline access to capital, which in this case is primarily incentives, rebates, but also financing. And I think that's an important part. We mentioned the IRA. There's also the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund piece of federal policy, where there's a large amount of capital that is intended to flow particularly into low and moderate income communities. And the idea is that, we have rebates and incentives are really meant to kind of bridge an affordability gap that hopefully will be temporary. We don't want to always need to have, $8,000 subsidies for people to be able to afford the machines that we need them to adopt to decarbonize our world. But in the meantime, we do need that. But we also have a lot of opportunity to use eventually private capital to fund these kinds of upgrades, similar to how solar has worked for some time now in some places where you have a policy regime that enables you to put the solar on someone's roof, make a loan to them, knowing that their monthly loan payment is going to be less than their total energy costs before they put the solar on their roof. And so what we're doing at Eli is trying to address some of the sort of gaps that exist right now, where for a low-income household, moderate-income household who want to decarbonize, we have all of this funding in the form of incentives and rebates. We have potentially, loans that can come in and bridge some gaps. But there's a lot of complexity to understanding who qualifies. I go back to my time at Grid Alternatives and the challenges. These are pretty technical programs. There's a lot of rules, a lot of eligibility requirements. They overlap sometimes, but not always. You can combine these funds with these funds, but not those other funds over there. And so our software helps kind of sort all of that out on a household by household basis, and gives contractors and installers a tool that allows them to sort of de-risk these projects and make sure that the capital stack is in place before they move forward with the job.
Yeah, I mean, amazing. There's so many pieces going on here, but at the end of the day, I guess how do you distribute your software in that flow? And that, it sounds like you have contractors trying to do projects, you have these program administrators and sources of financing kind of trying to get their money out the door in the right way.
Yeah.
And then ultimately you have homeowners trying to make, financial purchase decisions. Like, what is the way in which you show up, and to who and how? Yeah.
So one of the big challenges for us and for anyone in this space right now is trying to build a startup in a market that you very much hope is in the midst of a generational transformation. So we don't want to build the software that was needed last year in this space. We want to build the software that's going to be needed in 5 years. And so part of that means that we're essentially building a multi-sided platform where the different stakeholders that use our product all benefit from each other, and value accrues kind of across the platform. And so, our version of, the Airbnb guys putting some air mattresses in their apartment or whatever is that we need to kind of seed the platform on all sides in order to demonstrate the value kind of fully. And so we work directly with contractors. There are a lot of contractors. It's still a small minority of the whole ecosystem, but there are contractors who work with these programs who've experienced a lot of pain points around them. And we go directly to them and say, hey, you're regularly working on these 4 or 5 or 6 incentive programs in your service area. They're causing you a lot of pain. You've got 3 people working in your back office just processing incentive paperwork. Here's a tool that can make that a lot less painful for you. And in most cases, we're not saying, fire your admin people. We're saying, hey, there's a giant new program coming to your service territory in a few months. And if you work with us, we'll make sure you don't need to hire more admin people to handle that, right? So we're kind of helping them level up. And so that is working well. And there's a lot of demand for that amongst contractors who work with these programs. But I think in the long term, what we need to do is onboard a whole bunch of new contractors into this ecosystem, because we don't actually have enough of them yet. So we also are working sort of directly with the sources of capital on the other side of the platform, who also have pain points. Specifically, they have a lot of pain points around working with contractors and making it easy for contractors to access their programs. They also have pain points around things like verifying income for low and moderate income households. So we have an income verification API that those program administrators use to streamline things on their end. So, I think I don't know that we're following a tried and true playbook, but it feels like we're drawing from a few. We look at products like Plaid in the banking industry, and we've talked to folks there and kind of understood their go-to-market and how they how they worked with banks, for example, evolved over time, and what it was like in the early days versus later days. So we're drawing from those experiences as best we can, but also trying to be mindful that this whole space is undergoing a massive transformation, and we need to be pretty nimble in that regard.
Yeah. It's funny, as you're talking about this, I think a lot about all the people who don't think that there's a big role for software or fintech to play in deployment of climate solutions. And the closer you get and the more I've learned about this whole world of getting the dollars, we do the political hard work, and then like it's as though people think like the law passes and then all of a sudden like society has upgraded its infrastructure. And it's like, wait, between the law passing and then a sea of contractors installing new machines, like there's a lot of paperwork and dollars that need to be orchestrated.
Yep.
And I think about, I mean, at the highest level, like you are that orchestration layer trying to orchestrate the paperwork and the dollars to say, great, like let's actually execute the law that we just passed and that we just spent, a decade getting over the hump. Like, how do we actually make the thing work the way we want it to?
Yeah.
And like, and yes, that is ultimately going to require kind of the relationship with the folks providing the capital, whether that's the public entities, the program administrators, or the financiers. It's going to involve being involved in the flow of kind of things with the consumer and verification and making sure that they, that this makes sense for their roof and whatever it might be. Or they want to upgrade to a heat pump or whatever the project might be. And then ultimately, the contractors and the people actually doing the work. And like, there's almost like no better example in my mind of kind of how we take a plan of attack from on climate and do the infrastructure upgrade that actually kind of there is a pure like fintech software problem there. I don't know if you see it differently, but
no, I do. Absolutely. I mean, going back to prior to founding Eli, even, I think, my view has always been as a consumer of technology that like we've made so many things that used to be complicated and full of friction relatively frictionless. And it's our choice as a society to choose where we deploy that. And we have deployed, reducing friction in e-commerce and advertising. We have spent, I mean, I would love to see even just like if we took 10% of what we've spent on optimizing advertising and spent that on like making it easier to decarbonize your home, I think we'd be golden. Look, when I go to these like climate founder events and stuff, I feel a little inadequate when I'm sitting next to people who are like, well, I'm taking carbon out of the atmosphere and turning it into graphite for batteries. I'm like, okay, well, we're just like reducing paperwork and moving money around. But it is really important. And it also just feels like the exciting thing about it is there's a lot of like greenfield in terms of figuring out the precise sort of solutions that we need. But most of the time, these are things that we can do. These are things that we've proven work in some other context. And it's kind of hacking together the right things to make it work in this context. But I find that exciting.
Yeah, I find that super exciting and super excited to be an investor and everything. And super frustrating because you're like, this is the low hanging fruit.
Yeah.
And it's like it is. And so it's like the easy stuff. And it's like relatively like what you do is very hard, to be clear, like running a company, but from a technical perspective, it's like there's a lot here, a tremendous amount, of work that's just like kind of sitting there that we just need to coordinate and get done. And so I think there's just so much value there that people, they can kind of sit there and wonder if like mushrooms are going to save climate. And like, yeah, they might play a role in a new protein food system. And let's just like make sure the law we pass happens not in like 30 years, but in like 7 years. Like that will make a big difference, right?
Yeah, totally.
I love what you're doing.
I think, thank you. I to your point about what can startups do or what part of the ecosystem can startups occupy, I think that speaks to it a bit in that what startups are really good at that I have not seen government or nonprofits do very well. And there I could think of a few nonprofit examples, but is that sort of no amount of money and talent alone creates great software. Like there's it's very hard to shortcut the process of getting cycles of real user feedback and customer feedback, like essentially finding product market fit. And so I think like this is an example where everybody can agree that like this ecosystem that has been kind of created through these like misaligned incentives over the years of having all these kind of fragmented technology systems in place, that's not ideal. Nobody likes it. We've had meetings at the White House where they're like, this is terrible. How can we fix this? But it's not actually really, there isn't the kind of answer available to just say, okay, great. The White House, you fix it. Approve $100 million in funding and hire the best engineering team in the world and fix it. Like that's just not actually how this stuff works. And you need to be in the trenches doing, a lot of cycles of iteration and figuring things out, because there's pieces of this that, are never going to be fully solved. You're never going to get everybody to just like use some monolithic platform to do everything. That's not how any big industry has ever worked. There's, there can be standards, there can be interoperability, there can be really huge pieces of infrastructure that most people use. But I do think we need a bunch of startups just out there doing what startups do best to actually figure out what the thing is that we need, what the things are that we need, and bring them to market.
Yeah. How, kind of zooming out further from the problems Eli is solving, you mentioned kind of a point in your life when you're like, hey, maybe the 9 to 5 thing is going to be good for a while. I'm having a kid. Okay, well, you now have this 4-year-old, 7-year-old, almost 4-year-old, almost 7-year-old, and you're running a startup that's in this in the middle of one of the most complicated parts of this transition and a lot going on. How is that sitting with you?
How is that sitting with me? Shockingly well. I
think you're a musician, and you have the musical career. Don't want to leave that out.
That is not a career at this point. So I think part of it is just my own like personal mental makeup, which is I'm happiest when I'm doing this type of work, and I am the most energized with my kids when I'm more energized by my work. And fortunate, I'm very, very fortunate that I'm a founder and a CEO, and I get to help set the direction culturally of the company. And so we've been, I would say it started with pretty early on when I was just in the earliest stages of noodling on maybe doing this as a startup. My wife said, well, if you do another startup, you can only do it with Adrian, who is my co-founder. So Adrian, one of my 2 co-founders, he and I have worked together at 3 different startups prior to this. We're good friends. We've done a ton of like little side project things together over the years while we were doing other jobs. We kind of always come back to working together on something that we're passionate about. And, it sounds maybe overly simplistic, but at least at this phase of life, starting something like this with someone and trust completely is a huge leg up on a lot of the issues that early stage companies go through. And not just personally, but we know how to work together. We have ways of working, ways of communicating. Everything's kind of just like dialed in from day one. So that, I think that's been a huge part of enabling me to kind of thread the needle here with family and startup is starting from a place of like a really solid foundation with the team. And we've tried to be pretty intentional about building that out. Like one of our core values that we put on all our job posting is Eli is not a family. And it's
you have a family. It's not Eli.
Yeah, exactly.
We want Eli to succeed, but if we don't, that doesn't mean your family has failed.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's, for me at least, it allows me to feel a little more free to just like, I'm pouring everything I can into this. I think we're doing great and we're going to succeed on some level. And I don't have the same kind of my entire identity wrapped up in it the way I might have 15 years ago. And actually I think we do better work when we're a little bit less encumbered by these kind of notions that our whole world is going to fall apart if this doesn't work.
It deeply resonates. I mean, maybe because we have some similar phase of things, but there's something so strange about, like, I've never felt more like called to work than I have in the last couple of years, choosing to work on climate and feeling like tied to the purpose of something. And yet simultaneously, I've never felt more of a desire to like keep that part of identity in balance with, the frankly, the more important thing in my immediate life, which is like my relationship to my family and showing up as a good parent and good partner. And that is such an interesting, yes, there can be moments of tension there, but like it's such an interesting thing to try and hold. And I think you're completely right that actually doing that makes me more focused and better at the work with that perspective, and the perspective that like, no one of us is going to solve the massive problem that we're undertaking. We know we're all kind of at best a part of it, and yet none of us working on it will certainly not solve it. And so like we feel called to it, but also not, it feels so big
Yep.
that we know a little bit humbled in our place in it. Right.
Yep.
And I think that that's
Yeah.
actually healthy in a way too. Like we know we're not going to, I don't know, someone could feel like, hey, they will bring about AGI, and maybe there's a plausible chance that they could be responsible for bringing about AGI in some weird
Maybe.
definition of whatever that is. Who knows?
Yeah.
But I know that no one of us is going to solve the climate crisis. We all must play a part in it. So
Yeah, no, I think the time scale of it too, it's just like when you know that you're signing up for essentially
Decades.
a lifelong endeavor, you can't over-index for needing any kind of
week to week.
validation in the form of success. It's just like you got to feel good about the work you're putting in. And I think that, that's what parenting is like too. You don't get much validation as a parent. Although I would say men get some validation that we don't deserve, just like by showing
Yes.
up at the grocery store with a baby in our arms. And
Oh my God, you're just the
someone's like,
best.
"You're
You're
such a
just the
good
best
dad.
father ever. Yeah.
Oh my God, you're actually procuring food for your family." Yeah, but no, I do think, I work on climate because I do my best work when I care about something, and what could I possibly care more about than that, as a parent.
Yeah.
But I also work on it with a lot of humility in terms of, the reality of what, like, the world that my kids live in is going to be very different than this world because of climate change. I'm glad that, they'll look back and know that, like, I cared, and that, we cared as parents, and we worked on this. I don't have some fantasy in my head that, like, my kids are gonna, gonna look back and be like, my dad helped solve climate change, because I don't actually think that's what it's about.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Well, that's a great note to wrap on. How can folks follow along? At least you on the work side. What's your preferred channel of communication about all things Eli?
Yeah, eli.build. You can sign up there just to stay in touch with us. And we're on LinkedIn, and that's the only social network. We haven't spun up our TikTok account yet.
Okay. Awesome. Thanks for coming on, Jeff. This was so fun.
Thank you, Ben. And my God, hang in there. I don't even know what to say. It's so daunting to me to think of having another baby in my life. Not to scare you. I'm sure you're scared and excited.
There's that magic thing that happens where you black out.
Yeah,
the
totally.
beginning, and it's magic. And so yeah. Speaking of which, I'm gonna run and meet my wife at an appointment. So we'll see what's going on. All right.
Great to see you, man.
Bye. All right. Well, that's a wrap on episode 19 of Climate Papa. I really love what Jeff and the team at Eli are working on, and I can't wait to see the impact they're going to have. And instead of our usual song, today let's have Jeff and his bandmates from Hot Buttered Rum take us out. This is No Reason Why from their album Shine All Night.
There's no explanation, there's no reason why I should be up thinking about you this ungodly hour of night, with a head full of music and a belly full of wine, and a heart full of doubt and trouble on my mind. The first line's always easy, cool water from a well, bubbling up from somewhere underground. The next one's always way down at the other end of hell, at the bottom of the devil's lost and found. And I gotta get down to it before the sun comes up. It sure as hell ain't coming on its own. So I stumble to the kitchen for a ballpoint and a cup. And when that line come up, it don't come up alone. Oh, still there's no explanation, there's no reason why I should be up thinking about you this ungodly hour of night, with a head full of music and a belly full of wine, and a heart full of doubt and trouble on my mind. That second line comes screaming up from hell like a parade, with trumpets blowing black and gold and green. And there you are with feathers falling all around your face, let's go out dancing. And I say, what the hell? This whole damn street's on fire anyway. Then you dance right over to me like you never broke my heart. And I snatch that old tambourine away. Yeah, 'cause there's no explanation, there's no reason why I should be up thinking about you this ungodly hour of night, with a head full of music and a belly full of wine, and a heart full of doubt and trouble on my mind. I tap that tambourine while the saxophones blow, clear the way to heaven's golden shore. I play it till the cymbals fall and shatter down below, and we dance like we ain't never danced before. Yeah, 'cause there's no explanation, there's no reason why I should be up thinking about you this ungodly hour night, with a head full of music and a belly full of wine, and a heart full of doubt and trouble on my mind. There's no explanation, there's no reason why I should be up thinking about you this ungodly